Hey, Mark.
How you guys doing?
Good. How are you, Mark?
Good. I wish I was there.
You're here virtually. That's good.
I'm glad I'm
Um,
here.
And Megan, is she's on too. Okay. All right. We can't see her, but we ready to go? Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to go ahead and open the Hood River City Council meeting for September 12th. We have Counselor Zanmiller and Counselor Saunders are both on Zoom this evening. And Counselor Rivera is absent this evening, just for the record. I just want to remind everyone to turn off or turn down your cell phone. And we'll start with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. As we meet tonight, let us all remember that today we are stewards of land that has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years before the recent arrival of the European heritage dominant culture. We honor this land's ancestors as we go about our business today. And then we'll do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so we're going to recess the Hood River City Council meeting, and we're going to open the Urban Renewal meeting this evening. So we'll call the Urban Renewal meeting to order. It's about 3 minutes after 6. Do we have any agenda additions or corrections? Okay. We have a consent agenda, which is the minutes of August 8th.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Jessica has made a motion to approve the consent agenda, and Tim has seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Chair votes aye. Any abstentions? Any nays? All right. Passed unanimously. Our regular business item, proposed scope of work for the West Side Urban Renewal District, feasibility study, and development of an urban renewal plan. Abigail.
Thank you, Mayor. Jen, can I ask for your help to bring up my PowerPoint? Thanks. I'm not seeing it on the desktop. Give me just a moment here. I know you just loaded it. Great. Okay. Awesome. Give me one more second here to share my screen. Does that look? Okay, great. Thank you for having me here tonight. I am Abigail Elder, your city manager. Oops, I'm trying to get that back. And back in last year, November, in fact, it was my first urban renewal board meeting where you and the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee met to talk about the potential for a West Side Urban Renewal District. At that time, you got kind of an overview of what that concept might look like, looked at a couple of different projects. And then we had a couple of following meetings where both the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee and the agency board got a chance to refine that concept a little bit more. The next step would be for you, for the city council to authorize a scope of work to go for an RFP for a consultant. We just don't have this expertise on staff. This is a really technical project. So I thought I would walk you through kind of what that scope of work might look like. You have the proposed scope in your packet. And as I said, city council, because the district does not yet exist, actually is the decider. But I wanted to make sure that the Urban Renewal Board had the opportunity to weigh in. I think our port members are not here, so it actually turns out to be the same people. So, oh,
It looks like
Heather's on?
Heather
Oh,
is on.
fantastic. Hello, Heather. Thank you for
Hi.
being here tonight. I'm glad to have you. So I'm just going to walk through, please interrupt me with questions or thoughts. You all know that I am not an expert in urban renewal. We're all in this together, but I'm happy to take notes or follow up later. So the scope as proposed has two phases. The first one is the feasibility study. That's that first kind of a light touch. The second is the actual plan. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to list both of them in each of my slides because there's so much overlap. Both of them have public involvement. Both of them define a boundary. Both of them talk about blight. But when you read this, you'll see feasibility. And then when you see the urban renewal or the TIF plan, tax increment financing plan, think everything in phase 2 is phase 1 plus all of the additional pieces in phase 2. So the first part, probably one of the most important parts, are the public involvement piece. What I find super interesting about the project as we've currently conceived of it is that we are looking at implementing 3 plans that also had their own public involvement component. So looking at how we incorporate that or maybe revisit some of that. But the feasibility study and the TIF plan have public involvement components as well. The first and most important one probably is the taxing districts, and I'll talk about that in a second. I make the assumption, although should question this, that the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee will be the ad hoc committee that advises the board and the staff in terms of this project. Some agencies choose to make a special ad hoc group just for that particular district. It's my assumption that you want to use URAC. And I should note that URAC did not meet in August due to a lack of a quorum. So they don't have a specific recommendation for you. I did reach out to them a number of times asking if they had particular personal comments or thoughts. Did not get anything specific to bring to you, but they're meeting on Thursday and we'll get the same presentation. So trying to keep them involved as we go along. Planning Commission has a very specific role in the feasibility and in the TIF plan, mostly presentation and then being able to make official comments to you. Of course, we all know there'll be lots of other stakeholders who need to be included, including the general public. And in the RFP, we've specified that most materials need to be in English and Spanish. The TIF plan is much more regulated and requires at least 2 opportunities for general review and input, and a direct notice, probably a direct mailing to everyone in the proposed area. So hopefully by the time we get to that point, there's lots of awareness, but there will also be some very specific outreach. I mentioned that taxing districts are a special case. They really need to be involved and included. In the feasibility study, really providing them with information about what the impact might be to those districts, what those taxes would be if the district didn't exist and if the district did exist, so that they have a clear understanding. However, taxing districts do not have a vote or veto power over a possible plan. The one exception is the county, if we choose to include unincorporated areas into the district, which I think has been the assumption. So the county would need to give approval. One note that I put here in italics is if the district would include a public building, so for example, a police station, a city hall, a library, a school, then the 3 of the 4 most impacted districts would get to vote. As currently conceived, I don't think that there is plans for a public building in the district, but if that were to change, that does require some approval in the plan. Any questions or comments on that? Because I know that's a really important one. I know that Will Norris, the finance director and urban renewal administrator, before he left, did a formal presentation to the county. So I know that board commission is familiar. I have talked to most of the other administrators of other agencies, but I don't know what the awareness is of their elected officials. So that'll definitely be an important piece of this project. And just a quick reminder of all of the different taxing districts that exist in our community. We have the county, 911, City of River, the port, Parks and Rec, transportation, that's CAT, library district. And then the last 3 there are educational ones. And so they will not be impacted by any district creation in terms of revenue. But we would definitely want to keep them involved, particularly if there's going to be population shifts as they want to plan for future schools and so on. Boundaries is another category, both in feasibility and in the TIF plan. There are we can have specific boundaries, but we can also have multiple scenarios. When we're finally done, we need to have a map and a legal description As you all know, that the boundary or the area can only be limited to 25% of the city's acreage. So the decisions that you make about waterfront reducing or changing that could have a direct impact on this. And I talked to Elaine Howard, who's the ports consultant recently, and she thought that report would be ready to come to you in November. So we should have some good information before we get too far along here. This is a slide that Will and Dustin showed you back in November. This is probably what we think the maximum of the district could look like, 445 acres. You see a little cherry stem, right, to connect to the north side of the district. This is by no means the recommended geographic area. It just kind of gives you an idea of what the maximum could look like. Blight is such a funny word. It says to me like 1970s, but it's still in the ORS. It's still part of this. And I think when we think about Hood River, blight is not the word that comes to mind. But when you look at the ORS, the Oregon Revised Statute, blight has very specific definitions. And I pulled out two of them that I thought kind of might apply to this area. One, of course, the existence of inadequate streets or other right-of-way, open spaces, and utility. That is, I think, probably our primary definition here. And then the other is just kind of a lack or underuse of land that could be potentially useful and valuable for contributing to public health, safety, and welfare. But this is, again, a consultant would look at all of those definitions of blight, do some analysis to determine if we truly meet that criteria. So they look at land use and zoning, conditions of transportation system, the economic analysis, the other pieces. So that's a piece I'm sure would be a really important conversation for us as we think about blight in Hood River. I hope they find another word someday. Projects. So in the feasibility study pieces, projects are this can be pretty fuzzy. Here's kind of what we're thinking about. Here's kind of some concepts, and here's the magnitude of costs. We're really lucky if we decide to go forward with 3 plans. So we already have projects identified in our plans. When we get to the TIF plan, then again, they don't have to be they don't have to be like, this is exactly what we're doing, what properties want to acquire, but this is what we're trying to do. Here's what here's our goal, and here's the resources required. So as a reminder, when we've talked about this conceptually, we've talked about these 3 plans: our transportation system plan, the affordable housing strategy that you adopted in May this year, and then the multi-jurisdictional parks, recreation, and open space plan. And I've got those in that order intentionally, that our assumption is that the TSP would be first, right? Any kind of development that would happen would need the infrastructure first, and then housing. We'd want to probably do some land banking and other strategies early on while land is still available. And then the third one, as projects are creating new increment funding, that's when we would be bringing in open spaces and trails. I do want to note, when I said earlier, public buildings require a vote of the taxing districts. Park buildings are not included in that. So a recreation facility, picnic shelter, those are not public buildings under the definition of ORS 457. Comprehensive plan review is part of both feasibility and the TIF plan. ORS is not prescriptive as to what's required, but just that you need to review those. And then in the TIF plan, a narrative as to how each goal, the TIF plan, the comprehensive plan is 10 chapters, 12 chapters, right? How do we address housing? How do we address environmental factors? How do we address transportation? How each of those are addressed in the TIF plan. So that's a pretty lengthy part of that final report. Also, the district itself needs to have goals and objectives, and what those are and how those would be met by the plan. And then finally, to me, the most complicated, yet one of the most important, is that financial analysis. What are the projects? What would those costs be? What do we anticipate the revenues would be? What's the funding and what's the timing of those? And then what the frozen base would be, and then what the growth would be. So there's a piece where we have a little bit of that. Here's a snapshot of what Will Norris showed you back in November last year, 2 scenarios. The first one there is 20 years. The second one is 30 years. So you can see in that first one, front load the projects, right? And then pay it off later. The second one, slower growth, and then a couple big spikes for projects, but otherwise slow and steady costs. So that's kind of the review of what a feasibility and the plan would involve. The way I've written this proposed scope is that we do the feasibility study and then we take a pause. We don't promise that we're going to do that second piece until both the agency board and council have had a chance to review that and say, yep, that looks good. That's what we expected. We definitely want, this is, we've heard support from our partnering districts, and then we want to move forward. Phase 2 really builds on phase 1. So if we were to take a pause, I think phase 2 can be somewhat shorter. The timeline there is my guess. So I'm thinking if we had 6 months for the feasibility and then another 6 months for the full plan process, which I'm taking to include adoption of the plan. So that's my ambitious, but I think pretty realistic timeline. But down below, you can see there's some timeline considerations. I'm guessing that we will miss that August 1st deadline, which is a bummer, because then we would be able to freeze the base using the tax values of January 1st of this year. We missed that. We have to use the tax base of the following year. But I feel pretty confident that we can make the December 31st timeline, December 31st, 2023, in order to establish the first year of increment to be the next year, which has been our, I think, our assumed timeline all along. So while I feel a little bit behind on this project, I do think that we will make that without a problem. That's just the quick run through of what the scope of work and kind of what we're signing up for should you choose to move forward. I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments you might have.
Right, thanks, Abigail. Questions? All right.
Thank you for the presentation, Abigail. Nice to see you up there.
Thank you.
It's actually entered in the staff memo, but you just see we're talking about where we looked at. So the fiscal impact here is 150,000, 200,000. And it looks like this is an existing item in our budget. So this is not an extra budget.
Correct. We have 150,000 in general funds right now, budgeted. I am guessing it could go longer than that. And this would span both this fiscal year and the next fiscal year. So we could add additional funds later. It's also important to note that the district, if it were to create it, could pay back the general fund for those dollars. Yeah.
Had a question that I wasn't sure if you knew the answer to, but when I was looking through the scope, I noticed that the planning commission gets pulled in a couple times, and I didn't expect that because it seems like all the urban renewal stuff that we talk about doesn't usually involve the planning commission. I didn't know like what their role was.
That's a great question. And I don't know if I know off the top of my head. I think it's just from the land use issue. There will be zoning questions, there will be the land, the comprehensive plan, how they interact with that. But I'm looking to Dustin to see if he has more to add. Okay. But I can definitely follow up. There's a great publication. I will happy to send the link to all of you that just kind of runs through if you're starting from scratch and you're creating a whole agency, right? You don't have the agency, you've never done this before. Here are all the pieces. It comes from the Oregon Economic Development Corporation. I'm going to say OD. Yeah. So, but it's a great resource.
Anything, Tim? And then Mark.
So then, after this breaking of the urban agency, you're going to bring it back to council, some presentation, discussion.
Actually, my suggestion to you tonight is actually for you, the board, to give us feedback and then approve moving forward. And take it to the urban renewal more as a information. They have seen the scope. They saw it in August, but they weren't unable to meet. And then they are meeting on Thursday. If they had substantial comments that are different than what you hear, or they bring up questions that I didn't consider, I'm happy to bring it back to you next month. But I was looking for council to give us, so not the board, but council to give us approval to move forward with the RFP tonight.
So we would be moving, what we would actually do is if we all discuss this and we're okay with it, we would move it to our council meeting and put it as a regular business item this evening. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Mark?
Yeah, thanks. My thought is that we've talked about West Side Urban Renewal District for a couple of years, or at least feels like that long. And that everyone is on board. I haven't heard anyone, be a contrarian except for the details of, the border and such. I would wonder if we couldn't de-scope, and maybe the RFQ is even fine the way it is, but if we could de-scope the feasibility study and get right into the TIF, maybe at the new year and meet that August 1st deadline. We know that, wheels are turning, things are being built and stuff. And so the earlier we set the baseline, the higher revenue potential the district has. And to me, it feels like the proof is more in the details of the TIF as opposed to in the, should we do this or not, that's in the feasibility study. So just for discussion, I guess, is can we scooch it along? And Abigail's probably giving me a dirty look, but I can't see her.
Actually, I'm nodding, Counselor. Thank you for that question, because I believe the ORS 457 does not require a feasibility study. I would say from a staff point of view, when I think about setting up something this big and really wanting to be transparent, we've not done a lot of public involvement on this. And so definitely want to do that, which can happen in the TIF, but a TIF plan, but really that's a big part of the feasibility part, is starting that conversation. So
and I'm not
legally it's not
suggesting,
required.
right. I'm not suggesting no feasibility study. I'm suggesting sort of a, let's go right to the public input with the stuff that we've been presented a couple times, and it's been very consistent and quite positive. So not skipping steps, just going through them quicker.
Yeah, and some of the financial assumptions were worked through by Elaine Howard and her team in preparation for the November 2021 meeting that you had. So some small pre-work has been done.
All right. Heather, did you have any questions?
Sorry, having a hard time unmuting. I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Megan?
Hi. Yeah, I guess more information. The public engagement in the feasibility study versus the TIF plan, like what level, what are we hoping to learn from the public in maybe in both phases?
I think in the feasibility study, we're still kind of talking concept, right? Our folks, and yeah, I'd say a lot of it, in my mind, when I go to public involvement, I'm going immediately to the other taxing districts and the other elected officials. So for them to get that estimate of how this would impact them, that happens in the feasibility phase. And then in the TIF plan phase, it's more like, here's the plan, and they get 45 days to respond. So it's less collaborative. From a public point of view, they actually have a lot of overlap. It's recommended that you have an open house in the feasibility study stage, but you also should have an open house in the TIF plan. Like I say, because we assume that we would be implementing plans we already have. It's not that we're going to the public with a blank piece of paper. So the public involvement will look a little bit different than it would in a normal starting from scratch process.
Thank you.
I would also note that as your fairly new city manager, don't have a sense of who the stakeholders, certainly I know who some of the property owners are and some of the businesses in that area, but really kind of getting a sense of who our stakeholders are, who really deserve to be consulted early in the process will be super important.
All right. I guess the only thing I wanted to remind people, I'm gonna have to get a drink of water for one thing, but is that because the public, this doesn't go to the public for them to decide,
Right.
The general public.
Correct.
I mean, it goes to the other taxing districts because they're the ones that are affected by the lack of increase in
Right.
the tax amount they
Yeah,
will.
but even they
coming in
don't
for a
decide.
certain period of time.
Yeah,
Right. So the general public won't have added tax
correct.
to their property taxes. I just wanted to make that clear so that people that are listening understand that that's what that is.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point that, and I didn't cover this time, but the way tax fund increment funding is, we're freezing the tax base of the proposed district area. And then we are using those funds, that change in the frozen base, and then what the increase is, to actually fund projects in that district. So it is a change in moving some dollars around, but it doesn't actually change the size of the pie, except for the fact that investment creates, more property value. And so that's how it gets returned. But you're right, the average taxpayer will not see this. Well, no taxpayer will see a difference on their tax bill.
Thank you, Jen, for the water. So I hear Mark saying if there's a way we can speed it up, I agree with that sentiment. Because we have talked about this quite a bit in the past. I understand the need for the feasibility and then going into the TIF part. But if there is a way that it could be speeded up to get it frozen in August, it definitely will make a difference in the amount and the speed that we can collect.
Excellent.
Tax increments.
Agreed. Yep.
So I don't know if it could be, if there's some way to rewrite some portion of it to try and speed it up a bit, it would be good.
Good. That's great feedback for me to take back. I've been relying on some retired city managers who have done multiple urban renewal district projects. Nolan Young, who was previously City of the Dalles, also at Fairview, another city manager, who have been kind of guiding me through this process. So that's a great question for me to take back to them.
Right. So I think, we're not actually making a motion, but I think that what we would do is, if everyone is in agreement, we would add an agenda item, because the city council actually has to do this. It's not the urban renewal agency.
Because it's general fund dollars. Yeah.
So if we are in general in agreement that we should put it on the city council agenda this evening, we can move it over there. So I'm going to ask people if you're okay with that. Okay, Tim's good.
Yes.
All right. Mark looks like yes. Heather. Okay, she's nodding yes. And Megan is also giving a thumbs up as a yes. So,
Excellent.
and myself is a yes. So we have unanimous consent to move it to the Hood River City Council agenda this evening as a regular business item.
Excellent.
All right.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Are there any other items from agency members? I don't see anyone bringing anything up. So we will adjourn the Hood River Urban Renewal Agency meeting, and it is 6:30.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you, Heather. All right. We will reopen the Hood River City Council meeting, and we'll see if we have any business from the audience. Our first, I think I have 2 people signed up for business from the audience. And do we have our presenter ready? Jen, do you know? She is on. Okay, great. All right. So let's go with business from the audience. And John Nelson, did you want to speak? Okay, Heidi? You have 3 minutes. And we have your name, Heidi Ventura, 713 Katie's Lane.
That's correct.
Okay, great. 3 minutes.
All right. So it's nice that I'm here today because I came out as a psilocybin user at a county planning meeting a couple months ago. And since then, I've really been watching what's happening. And I appreciate that the city didn't overreact as many counties in rural Oregon have overreacted, and that you're allowing the possibility of psilocybin services here. I've had long-term treatment-resistant depression most of my life. And for the last 3 years, I've been completely free of depression and able to get treatment anytime I need it. I have to go out of state and do this illegally. I'm still illegal everywhere, right? So, but it's really helped me. It's ended a lot of suffering for me. I had an op-ed in the paper a couple weeks ago. You might have seen it. If you haven't seen it, you can look at it now. Since I came out, I have been contacted by dozens of people who are looking forward to the possibility of ending their own suffering by trying psilocybin therapy. They're hoping to be treated for depression like me, PTSD, end of life anxiety, and a lot of people just want to use it for personal growth. I also want you to know I'm serving on one of the rules advisory committees for OHA. So I will have even more information than I have now. I've read through the rules, the proposed rules, and they're very restrictive. I mean, yeah, I don't think you have to worry about noise or commotion or crime or any of that stuff. It is so tightly controlled that it's not going to be, you probably won't even know these businesses are here. There's already a psychedelic therapy place here that I didn't know about that uses ketamine. Has anybody heard about it? Any noise about it? No, nobody even knows it's in town, including me. So I just want you to know it looks like most of the rural counties in our state are opting out. People who are suffering in all of Eastern Oregon will be coming to probably Hood River County because Wasco County is going to further restrict it. So people are going to be wanting to come here to get help with their suffering. I don't think people are going to come here to have parties, and I don't even think it's possible under the rules to have any fun with psilocybin. So I just want to thank you for what you're doing. Please let the healing happen. People in Hood River and beyond need this medicine. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, for sharing. All right. So we're going to have a presentation this evening from the Oregon Health Authority on psilocybin services. So Angela Albee.
Yes, hello.
Hi, go ahead. We'd like to hear what this is all about.
Thank you so much for the invitation to present. And I apologize. I literally just presented to the Dells, your neighbors, and they say hello. And so I'm trying to make this interesting for all of you where I'm not feeling duplicative. So please at any time stop me if you want clarification or you just can't wait to ask a question, and I'm happy to take one. To begin, my name is Angie Albee, and I'm the manager of the Oregon Psilocybin Services section. We're housed within the Oregon Health Authority Public Health Division Center for Health Protection. So we are very much in alignment with public health goals and also very much in the regulatory arm of the division. And so we do a lot of regulatory work, and as you heard previously, we are have really drafted some what I think to be pretty incredible rules for first in the nation to implement this really incredible body of work. I do want to also just mention, I was not involved in the drafting of the statutory language. I represent the Oregon Health Authority, and we are implementing this policy. So just wanting to make sure I make that clear. I also am happy to share my screen if that's helpful for all of you, or I can just talk. I'm seeing a head nod. Should I go ahead and share? Great. Okay.
Sounds good.
You should be able to see the opening slide. So I'll go ahead and get started. And before I do that, I just want to explain, many of you might already know this, but many have asked these questions. What is psilocybin? Why is this important? And so I'll answer those two questions before I really get into the presentation more. And first of all, psilocybin is a compound that's found within certain kinds of mushrooms. There are over 200 species of psilocybin producing mushrooms that grow naturally throughout the world, and some of which grow naturally in the Pacific Northwest. Indigenous communities have used psilocybin for centuries, and there is cultural and anthropological information that is also very much a partner to the scientific and academic and research information that is also being published widely. So I just want to be able to acknowledge that. And before I get started, as we talk about psilocybin, it's important to note that we are starting with one species of psilocybin producing mushroom at the recommendation of the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, which is our advisory board comprised of lots of licensed professionals, lots of medical professionals, mycologists, and so many others that are really sharing and wanting to develop a successful framework. So they were part of really taking a look at lots of information, and lots of their recommendations, really were the inspiration for the backbone of our rules. So starting with one species of psilocybin, knowing that there are more than 200, and also just wanting to say that you just really want to honor and respect the hard work that's happened over the past year and a half with the board. Now, why psilocybin services? As you've heard, psilocybin really, people are sharing lots of testimonies of just on their own of how psilocybin has, been really beneficial in treating anxiety and depression and other issues. And there's a wide body of research, scientific, academic, medical institutions, clinical trials, publishing information that are really showing the potential of psilocybin to address anxiety, depression. This can also be PTSD, end of life anxiety. This can also, really help folks with other issues, addiction. There's a strong study about alcohol and tobacco and addressing addiction there. And there, as we speak, are more studies happening. So although there's been a wide amount of research that's been published, there's more coming. So it's hard to keep track of it all. And in service to that, you should know that Measure 109 directed the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board to review all of that scientific literature. And so there is a scientific literature posted on our website, and I'll follow up with you all after this presentation today to provide some of those links to our website. The FDA has also designated psilocybin to be a breakthrough therapy for depression. So there's a lot coming, and as you all know, we're first in the nation to implement this kind of model. So moving on, I just want to introduce our team. We are a section full of 3 programs, policy and engagement, a licensing program that will be reviewing license applications, making sure they're consistent with statute and rule and meeting those criteria, and also a compliance team that will be, fielding any complaints and doing investigations, also helping with inspecting before we issue a license to ensure that those licensed premises are within, in compliance with our statute and rule. I want to talk a little about what is Measure 109. Actually, there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what this does, and I just want to create some clarifications for all of you. In Oregon, November 2020, Oregon voters passed the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act. This created a regulatory framework for the production of psilocybin and the provision of psilocybin services. Measure 109 is not a dispensary model. It's not like cannabis at all. In fact, it's not even a plant, it's a fungi. So this is where, we really rely on mycological information, and those expertise that study mushrooms. So psilocybin is only available to clients who are 21 years of age or older that have an interest in psilocybin services, but only after they complete a number of steps prior to even being able to schedule what we consider to be the administration session where psilocybin is purchased and consumed. That can only happen at a licensed service center. So psilocybin cannot be sold to clients to take off site, and can only be consumed at a licensed service center under some very specific regulatory requirements, which you've heard previously. It's also important to note, and I'll get into psilocybin services and what that looks like, but it's important to note that there's a lot of public health and safety considerations that have been put into these rules. And this doesn't create a consumer market for psilocybin in the way that cannabis has. In fact, the fungi doesn't even grow in the same kind of environment. And I can get into that in a little bit as well. But it doesn't allow for interstate commerce. It doesn't allow for import or export. And it also is very much centered on client safety and access. There's a lot of folks that really are vulnerable that want to access services, and many folks that have accessibility needs. So all of those issues were considered when we were drafting our rules. I'll start with the 4 license types, and as I sort of braid all of this together, I'll try to give a little more clarification about what this might look like. So first, there's a manufacturer license. Manufacturer is the licensed premises where psilocybin is cultivated or processed. We've already adopted rules earlier this year on which kinds of products can be processed. It's just dried whole fungi. It's a ground homogenized product that can be either encapsulated or maybe stirred into a tea. It's also for extracts, and then also for products like chocolates that could be created. A lot of people are coming in that might have some swallowing issues or difficulty swallowing. We wanted to create accessibility with extracts. There might be folks that don't want to choke down eating a dried mushroom, and so we know that having a food product might be a little more palatable. So we really thought of all of those considerations when setting that up. It's important to note that cultivation can only happen indoors. This is not outdoor cultivation. And just, in case you don't know much about fungi will not take a lot of space compared to something like cannabis or resources such as water or electricity in the same way. What we're looking at is much smaller premises where psilocybin is cultivated. It's also important to note that we set production limits on the amount of psilocybin that can be cultivated and produced and stored. And so it's really important to recognize that this isn't a robust consumer market. We're really focused on making sure we're centering the clients accessing services. Manufacturer sites have to have defined boundaries, and also all product has to be tracked in a product tracking system. Manufacturers also have to have if a landowner, they're renting from a landowner, their permission to use that land for this purpose. And when I say land, I mean, the licensed premises, which is indoor cultivation. So a manufacturer then cultivates and processes products, and then what? Well, then it goes to a testing lab that's licensed to test products. And testing labs will test, they have to be accredited, by the way, by the Oregon Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. And they'll test for species identification. Remember, we're starting with one species of psilocybin. And so they'll be testing for that species as well as the potency of the product. And so we understand the potency that's involved. So once a testing lab enters the testing results back into the system, then a licensed manufacturer can either take that product and sell it to a licensed service center, or perhaps if it's a raw product like dried whole fungi, they can then sell it to another manufacturer to process if they don't have that processing skill. But those are the only 2 avenues for transferring product. So after that, the manufacturer sells to a licensed service center once we know that the testing results are filled in and that product has passed testing. Then it goes to the licensed service center, which is a defined premises, and again, the only place where psilocybin services take place, where psilocybin is sold to a client and consumed by a client on site. Service centers cannot be located within 1,000 feet of a school. Again, have to have defined boundaries, have to also track any part of the product movement, from a manufacturer to a client, or if anything gets wasted or disposed of, if it expires or something. And so we'll get into the psilocybin services piece a little bit more. We have over 65 pages of rules, so there's a lot of built into the rules related to these licensed premises. And I will get a link to you all so you can read those rules later. The last license type is a facilitator license. This is an individual who has completed a specialized psilocybin facilitator training program, who goes through a criminal background check and also passes an exam, a comprehensive skills exam from their training program, and also a regulations exam that's administered by OHA. This is a person that's present with a client for the 3 parts of psilocybin services, and I'll talk about that right now. First, there's a preparation session. This is where a client, remember 21 years of age or older, really wants to sit down and talk about if psilocybin services is right for them. This is a client intake process. It also includes informed consent, understanding the potential risks associated with going through psilocybin services, understanding what to expect. as well as a client bill of rights that explains what their rights are, and make sure that they're receiving this information in the language of their preference, and if they have any other kinds of accessibility needs, making sure that they're receiving that information in an appropriate way. So after the preparation session, it's a time for a client and a licensed facilitator to determine, is this is this a good next step? Does a client decide they want to continue and move forward and schedule that administration session at a licensed service center? Or does a facilitator say, you know what, I really think I should refer you to another facilitator that might be able to specialize in this a little bit more. We think that there will be an opportunity to build a strong network of licensed facilitators coming from varied lived and professional experience. We might have licensed facilitators who are also licensed as counselors, therapists, social workers, psychologists. They will have to check with their professional licensing board to make sure that they understand the risks being, associating with a Schedule I substance. And for DEA licensed prescribers, it could be a conflict that probably shouldn't happen because that's through the federal government. But at the same time, we think there's an opportunity here. And even though the scope of practice, they won't be able to practice on both scopes of practice under Measure 109 and their other professional licensure, we think that there could be a really great opportunity, lots of great knowledge and experience serving people in communities. And we really think there's an opportunity to provide culturally responsive services to people throughout the state of Oregon in the way that they like to receive them. So then after that initial session, there's the administration session. Again, clients purchase psilocybin, consume psilocybin on site in the presence of a licensed facilitator. And also there are a lot of details and rules, but according to the potency of the product that they choose to consume, they might decide to go less than a standard dose, just a small dose, just to see what happens, how their body responds, or they might decide to go with a standard dose of psilocybin. And so whatever the dose, there will be linked to some requirements, a minimal amount of time that they have to spend at the licensed service center to make sure that the effects have worn out of their system. It's important to note we will not allow clients to drive or operate heavy machinery after leaving psilocybin services. They will set up a transportation plan with a licensed facilitator, as well as a safety and support plan as well. After the administration session takes place, then there's an opportunity for a client and licensed facilitator to connect again in an integration session. And so an integration session could be a time where a client needs referrals to peer support networks, psychedelic integration resources, or other community resources that might be helpful as they continue to process their experience. I won't say too much about the product tracking system. I think you all understand that, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I want to move on to some local government considerations. I just want to highlight for you all, as you know, local governments can adopt ordinances to prohibit service centers and manufacturers from being located in their local jurisdictions. These ordinances have to be referred to voters at the next statewide general election. So in November, we'll know from those areas that have adopted ordinances whether or not voters choose to pass them, and that will determine who we can license in January of 2023. Local governments might not adopt ordinances. They might choose that they want to adopt reasonable time, place, and manner regulations. Even if OHA has rules that permit certain hours of operation, if a local government decides to go further and refine that, that is absolutely your authority. And so it's just important to highlight that. Another piece of this that is important is any service center manufacturer license applicant has to provide a land use compatibility statement that ensures that their licensed premises that they're proposing is in compliance with local jurisdiction, zoning, and land use laws. We've already standardized a form for local governments to use, and I'm happy to provide that as follow-up after this presentation. I will go on to site requirements. Just quickly want to mention service centers can't be within 1,000 feet of a school. We're developing a GIS mapping tool so that we can be a better resource to folks in looking up these areas and being able to map out where our licensees are throughout the state. They cannot be located on public land, and they must have defined boundaries, and they cannot be located at a residence. If they're within city limits, they cannot be in an exclusively residentially zoned area. Manufacturers cannot cultivate outdoors, cannot be located on public land, must have defined boundaries and landowner consent. There is, we are a fee-based structure, so the cost of license fees has to cover the cost of our section's licensing and compliance work. And so, you know, we can get into issues about that, but because insurance isn't covering this, this is, you know, going to be an expense for licensees and for clients that want to access psilocybin services. It's important to note this because for people that think that someone's just going to, you know, go through all of this for, you know, with the price tags that, you know, we might see, we think that the unregulated space already has a pretty robust presence and has since, you know, mushrooms grow naturally in the Pacific Northwest. You know, we think that this is going to be, these folks coming in are going to be serious about wanting to address certain issues with psilocybin services. I might just want to mention too that the retail product, there's a 15% tax on the retail sale of the product to the client. Department of Revenue will take those fees and take out their administrative cost. Whatever's left over, if there's anything left over, it will come back to support our program. We're hoping that we can work on ways to really ensure more affordable licensure fees as we move forward. There are some key dates I want to highlight briefly, and then I'll have a few follow-up statements and then really turn it over to you for any questions you have. It's important to note that last year we started reaching out to partners to understand how we should build our rulemaking timeline. And we heard from folks that there were certain pieces that they really felt it needed to be expedited. So we expedited those rules for training programs that facilitators enter into and for products and testing so that we could get all of that work moving forward. And so we adopted those rules this spring. And we are now in another rulemaking process for the remainder of the rules for this work. And we are going through rulemaking advisory committees right now and will be for the next couple of weeks. Those are public meetings you can listen in if you'd like. And then we'll have a public revise draft rules again, release those revised rules from those REC conversations, and then we'll have an open public comment period from November 1st through the 21st. Then we adopt rules by December 30th of this year, and January 2nd of 2023, we begin accepting applications for licensure. Our team has been doing tons of work developing an online application system for training programs, licensees, and also where we do compliance case management work. And we really think this is going to create more efficient processes and better documentation. It's a really incredible body of work, but we'll be ready to go. We're building all of our processes and policy and procedure internally. We're hiring team members and building out our team, and really ready for that January 2nd, 2023 date. I just want to follow up by saying that really it's such an honor to be able to come and speak with you all. Partnerships are incredibly important, as well as being transparent information. So I hope that you all know that we are listening and learning, and we've you know, we're always happy to answer questions as we move along in this process. And we also know that we're going to have some work to do. We might have to make some changes or address, you know, certain rules as we move forward. And our advisory board will probably have more recommendations for us. And so I just encourage everyone to stay connected, join our distribution list, and I'm happy now to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Angela. I have one question. Licensing applications in January, is that licensing for manufacture or growing and licensing for administration service center people? Is that both?
Yes, it's for all license types. And so something to just keep in mind is it really takes all 4 licenses to really be able to provide psilocybin services. So you can't have a service center without a manufacturer. You can't have a manufacturer without a testing lab. You can't have psilocybin services without a facilitator. So while we will be ready to accept applications for folks that want to be licensed, we also understand it might take some time for folks to get up and running. And, you know, these are big investments and there's not a lot of funds available to folks when you're working with a Schedule I substance. So there's a lot of philanthropy and a lot of investment happening. But I do think that we're just trying to be a good resource to those folks that do want to be licensed.
Thank you. Other people have questions? Nothing, Tim? Okay. Megan?
Yes, thank you. You touched on this right at the end, but you know, to the point of we are the first state doing this, and there's clearly going to be some lessons learned of things that need to be tweaked or changed. Like, what will the process be to update things? How often will that occur? Can you retroactively change licenses that have already been approved?
Great questions. I failed to mention that this is annual licensure. So licensees will have to apply every year to renew their license. So if for whatever reason we, you know, adopt a new set of rules, they will have to be in compliance with those rules in order to be issued a license. Yes, we are first in the nation to develop this regulatory framework. And that's part of the reason why we are, I think you heard, we're being very thoughtful and intentional, knowing that this body of work might evolve and grow, but we want to start really small and make sure that we're really considering public health, safety, access, and other issues that are within our statutory authority. So our psilocybin advisory board, you know, meets, we'll start meeting quarterly after this development period ends in December. And they'll probably, you know, have new guest speakers, new information, new research to think about, and give recommendations to OHA. I assume that for a while we'll probably open rules, probably annually if there's something to fix. I can't imagine that we've made the most perfect framework in the world, but I'm very proud of the work our team has done. And I can say it's taken hundreds of people and so much expertise and information from all walks of life to create the rules we have. And so I hope you all get a chance to read those.
Thank you.
Mark? Mark, we can't hear you. You must be muted.
That was my best line ever, too. Angela, thanks for the presentation. That was great. I'm very excited and interested in seeing this thing be successful. So that's good. A question and a request. The question is we as the city can change time and place rules at any time. Is that true? I mean, so if it seems like it's nicely restricted right now, but if we start learning lessons, you know, in the first 6 months, there's nothing that stops the city from changing things that way, right? Is that true?
Yeah, so local governments can adopt time, place, and manner restrictions, regulations, and I would just encourage you to work with your council on, you know, kind of the best route to do that. But yeah, you definitely have that opportunity, and
okay.
Yeah.
All right, and then the other thing is, I don't know if you saw the letter from Belinda Bala. She's the director of the Hood River County Prevention Office. She sent us one today, and although I don't share many of her concerns, you know, she has the best for Hood River in her heart. So I would ask that maybe you help. You know, I think it feels mostly like an education thing, but if you could get with Belinda and just make sure that some of those things that she brought up are addressed. And I think in your presentation you did. So I just see two good groups that are trying to do good, and you should be talking. So that would be my request part. So thanks.
Thank you. I have not seen the letter, but need to would love to have a copy so I can be aware of those concerns. And I will say that we do have a public health officer that's part of our advisory board. If you're interested, I won't go through the whole exhaustive list, but there's psychopharmacology, mycology, harm reduction specialist, public health officer, a number of public health folks. 3 additional public health folks that serve on the board, and many others. So there are a number of folks, and at the same time, we know this is new. It's shifting from a drug policy framework that's rooted in the war on drugs and really understanding this substance as a possibility for addressing some of the most difficult issues that people are facing today with depression and anxiety and trauma. So we know that this is a big lift to just suddenly make this shift, and we're very much happy to be partners to anyone, both to listen to concerns, but also so that we can better educate folks when we're out speaking. And I really hope you all know this is an open door, and I'm really honored for this invitation, and hope that we can keep the lines of communication open. Always happy to come back and provide updates as needed.
Thanks, Angela. Jessica or Eric, did you have any questions? Go ahead, Eric.
Hi, Angela. Thank you again for the presentation. Very thoughtful and informative. Much appreciated. You referenced that the psilocybin is a Schedule 1 substance. I assume that's in reference to DEQ or DEA's list of controlled substances. And I know with respect to cannabis and marijuana, we've had at least some guidance from, if not the current, certainly the prior federal administration about enforcement and perhaps some kind of letting off the gas in that regard. I'm just wondering do we have any guidance from the current federal administration, either the actual administration or the federal attorneys in say the state of Oregon about what their perspective might be given the status on the as a controlled one, Schedule 1 substance?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. First of all, Measure 109 directs the Psilocybin Advisory Board, and I'm also the ex officio executive director of that board. So I'm speaking on behalf of them in that capacity right now, but we'll be reaching out, board leadership and parts of OHA will be reaching out to the U.S. Attorney for Oregon, after the development period ends, which is after this, we adopt rules. And so we don't have any guidance right now. I can say it's complicated, and one reason why is the FDA just designated psilocybin a breakthrough therapy for depression, and there's a lot of talk about big pharma coming out with a synthetic psilocybin for the medical model, and so that might not happen immediately and might take a few years, and I don't know I don't know the trajectory for that. But it's complex because I think there's so much movement and so much promise and so much research being published that it puts us in a different frame of reference, so to speak. But to that point, I just want to also mention that while even if a medical model exist, I think that there's an ability to coexist together. I think that there's a lot of folks who might not have the same kind of relationship with the medical model that could be well served through the Measure 109 frameworks of the world. And so we're really looking into those pieces as we implement. But that's a great question. I hope this is somewhat helpful, and I hope by sometime next year I'll have some more information to share.
All right. Thank you, Angela. Really appreciate your thorough presentation, and definitely I'm sure the city will keep in touch as things go forward. So wish you the best on it, and us too, I guess.
Yes. Thank you. Let us know if you have questions. I will follow up with an email that kind of directs you to some resources on our website, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Next, we have a public hearing regarding nonprofit corporation low-income housing tax exemption. So is Dustin, are you gonna do that? Okay,
Thank you, Kevin.
I'll go ahead and start reading the script because I have a script I do need to read for this before we get our staff report anyway. I call to order a public hearing for ordinance 2069, an amendment to chapter 3.40 of the Hood River Municipal Code to establish a nonprofit corporation low-income housing tax exemption. Let me begin with a description of tonight's hearing and a few required disclosures. First, we will hear from staff. Then we will take any public testimony. Finally, we will close the hearing and deliberate prior to acting on the ordinance. Here are some of the basic rules for presenting testimony in tonight's hearing. I don't even know if we're going to have anybody testifying, so let's just wait on that. Yeah, we'll go ahead with the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I just lost my computer.
Oh,
Hopefully not in a way that causes any undue distress beyond today. But anyway, ordinance 2069 in public hearing. This ordinance is born directly out of the affordable housing strategy, which you heard one of the key strategies that was identified for council consideration or for city's future consideration was the use and establishment of a program that would allow not-for-profit developers or developers of affordable housing to qualify for tax benefits. Currently, as the revised statutes are written, really the only person automatically or only corporation automatically entitled or even eligible for ad valorem or your property taxes exemption is the housing authority, Mid-Columbia Housing or Columbia Cascade Housing, however it manifests here. There are other developers and not-for-profit developers that do develop affordable housing. Currently, you are working with community development partners. That would be an example of a not-for-profit developer who, in its own right, is not entitled to any of the not-for-profit tax status here in the city. So this ordinance sets up an opportunity to evaluate and provide a tax exemption for not-for-profit developers who build affordable housing projects and developments, both of which not-for-profit as well as affordable housing are defined in this ordinance. This doesn't automatically grant them this exemption, but it does provide a method within the municipal code to have those requests heard. So that's really the summary of this ordinance 2069. Like any ordinance requires 2 hearings. Council is the only body to authorize to make any changes here. So, as discussed in the housing production strategy, we've presented this for implementation. And I'm here for any questions.
all right. I've got a couple questions. Well, I guess we can do questions. We won't deliberate yet, but we can do any questions we have. And then we'll ask if there's any public testimony after we do questions, because if we have a question, then somebody in the audience might have the same question. So there's a couple different, one of the things in here, it says 60% or below the area median income qualifies as low income, but that's just the first year. And then the next year, it can go up to 80% of the area median income. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that's explicitly written. From my understanding, it's aspirational. You would hope that our concern would be, do you stabilize housing for someone, they gain a certain level of affluency, and now they're displaced. That is not really the goal. And we've seen and heard some of that anecdotally in the housing production strategy from some of our stakeholders, is that they got a better job and now they're going to lose their house. So this provides a little headroom to entry. And then a little opportunity as people hopefully gain some additional resources and not at the risk of them being displaced.
And we've heard from some of the, or at least one of the land trusts that had said they might be doing something that was 120% or below, and maybe even a sale, but this would not include those.
Right,
Because
that's
they
correct.
aren't, they just aren't low enough. Okay.
Right. Yeah, this is definitely targeted at that 60 to 80 threshold that we define as affordable. So capital A affordable.
Other questions for staff at this point? Jessica?
A couple, so, just to clarify, we can only forgive the city tax, right? It's not other taxes.
Correct. Yeah, you only have agency over the ad valorem taxes of the city. We do have the opportunity, and we did share this with our other taxing agencies. They were one of the stakeholder groups and the affordable housing. So they would have the opportunity to also give this consideration if they saw fit to adopt it. There's a threshold that once 51%, this is a revised statute threshold that once 51% of the basically total agencies under that comprise 51% of the ad valorem taxes pass it, it would automatically do the rest. So if we had 51% of whether it was city, county, school, or combination thereof, once 51% of the agencies adopted this, it would then trigger the other 49% as a mandatory forgiveness. But at this point, the consideration to ask is only for the city's section, not for anyone else's.
And then the one other question was, so, and also does it for property that's being held for the purpose of developing housing? And I was wondering what would happen if it was, held for a few years with this purpose and then the intent changed after a few years. Would they have to go back and pay for the years forgiven? I saw there is some language in there about what happens if it changes.
Yeah, there's some limits on we call it like a clawback provision if you forego your aspect. I'm trying to pull it up in front of me on the public computer here. But I presume if you lost qualifications, you would be taken out. If it was sold to a out of not-for-profit status or no longer held.
Like, let's say a nonprofit was holding it for the purpose of developing housing for a few years, and then they decide, oh, we actually need to build our own facility on it, kind of like our office. Would they, but if we've forgiven the tax for a few years, would they have to go back and pay that tax?
Yeah,
And I'm sorry, I meant to ask you this.
yeah. Let me double check and see where I can find that in there. Or if Dan has it in front of him, I believe he is on with us as well. Slow computer. Thank you. Okay, termination section is 3.4070. It shows up on pages 24 and 25. You have the right to take action and discovery. And the right to claw, this is the clawback provision. And I believe that shows up in section G. Basically, if someone is failing to comply, you have a right to pass ordinance and file it, sending that to the assessor's office. Stating additional taxes may be collected as provided in subsection F. It's the exemption minus 1 year.
then you go back to the oldest year for which additional taxes are due. So it does go back, like if it was 5 years, it will go clear back to that beginning year that they
Yes,
didn't pay.
that is my read of this.
Okay.
Minus 1 year. But
Any other questions?
No.
No, okay, okay. Go ahead, Tim, and then Mark.
So for the 51% measure, does that have, is that like a case by case basis, or is it just a blanket?
well, if 51% of our taxing bodies, whether it was whatever combination thereof, be it school district, city, county, that would be, if we all pass this ordinance, then the other districts would also be rolled into the exemption. So it's not case by case. It would be if everyone passed the similar ordinance of 2069 and they're allowing this to happen, then essentially it grants a pathway to a property tax exemption that would be from all bodies. Again,
For all nonprofits in the future.
right. For those that qualify, the request still would have to be qualified and vetted, but they would have access to 100% of a local tax exemption.
And so then where are the approving body for making that determination?
Right.
Whether they, for all the other taxing districts?
Well, and I believe that if someone is going to ask for a tax exemption, other bodies would have to hear that as well. But I am going to I'm making the assumption we are the lead agency on this. Really, because most of the development that is going to occur, probably of some size and not-for-profit, is going to occur here. So,
Thank you.
Mark?
Thanks. Megan was on that committee. I would defer to her question first if that is okay with you, Kate.
Sure. Yeah. Megan?
Sure. I mean, my questions aren't necessarily committee related. I will say big picture, yes, this is one of the committee supported strategies in the housing strategy. So I'm generally on board. I just kind of had two clarifying questions from my own brain. So Dustin, in 3.40.060, they talks about the only the portion of the property that's actually used for housing is exempt. And I'm kind of, I guess I was just for my own brain, assuming Rand Road gets developed as currently planned, does that mean that the park isn't exempt, but the land the housing is, or how does that get interpreted?
I would consider the housing part and parcel to the development of affordable housing. We have mandates for open space requirements, and really that is part of our purchase option and development agreement that we would, that I would consider that part and parcel to the development, not unique and set aside. Similar to streets, you have portions of streets. I think this is really intended to where if you had a tract that had some other space that wasn't dedicated, or a mixed use development that maybe had a portion of affordable housing and something completely unrelated, that we have a way to parcel out what should be exempt and what is not. But in terms of Rand Road, in my opinion, that is one complete development. It's not a park development separated from a housing construction project. So it is, I believe they would be eligible under this for the complete waiver for the entire.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Awesome. Okay, and then page 24 of the packet, 3.40.070A. I guess I just found the sentence confusing. Is this just talking about if we've granted an exemption for future development and they didn't do it, that we can claw back the money? But is there anything of we granted an exemption for a currently built thing, but then they stop being low income? Do we get to claw back the money then as well?
I think that would be a non-compliance, whether it was built or future. So, I mean, whether if they lost their status and they went to a market rate product and all of a sudden started renting at market rate, I believe that would be an immediate cause for a termination, or not
Okay.
immediate cause, but cause for us to go through the process of termination.
Okay, is there, I mean, I guess we're not in the place of redoing language, but like, I have a hard time reading that in there. Is there a way to clear that up in that section?
Sure, and this is first reading only. This is a 2 reading, so we do have an opportunity to do some clarifications and amendments.
Okay, then yeah, some way to make it clear that that's for both open land and for developed property non-compliance.
Anything else, Megan?
That should be it. So thank you.
All right. Mark, have you got anything else?
Yeah.
Okay.
In 3.40.60, there's a stuff about the property held for future, basically giving tax credits for future development stuff that we've, Jessica talked about. I don't see that that's reflected in 4.40A, which is, here's how we decide whether it's a valid thing, which is all about what are the income levels of the people, who are they, and stuff like that. I don't see that 440 addresses future development and giving tax breaks is ahead of time.
440?
440A says, here's how we're going to determine whether somebody's qualified. And,
Oh, 340. Okay. I never.
Yeah. And then 4060 says, well, here's a way to get a tax exemption 5 years before you even build anything. And those don't seem complementary in my reading. And this is part of the 51% thing in 3.40.60 F. It sure reads to me like the exemption is provided by this chapter shall apply to the tax levy of all taxing districts as opposed to just the city. So I don't see 51% written in here. And even if it was, each district, I assume, has their own what qualifies and what doesn't qualify as an exemption, their version of 40.40A. So I don't see how we can, all we can assure is the city's exemption, and then we encourage other districts, right? I mean, that's the bottom line.
That's correct.
But I read F because it has, that only applies if taxing district consent is secured. And that's defined in this ordinance to be 51% or more.
Where does it say in F that other districts have concurred?
So taxing district consent as defined in 33.40-10, which if I can pull that up.
That could be, yep.
Taxing district consent is defined as means that the governing boards of taxing districts that when combined with the city of Hood River's tax rate of taxation equal 51% or more of the total combined rate of taxation for the property. So it's just referencing a definition earlier in the.
Right, but still, if everyone has their version of 3.40.40A, which is, this is when I'm going to give an exemption, you could come up with different results, is my expectation. Maybe not. And
I read that F on that the same way you do, Mark. And it kind of just sits out there by itself, and so it doesn't tie back to something else, it seems like. So it doesn't make sense because it's not exactly tied back.
And then just moving through my questions, and then we'll talk after we've closed the hearing thing, of course. When we talk about partial use, and it was either Megan or Tim that brought it up, is if the 501c3 was a church and they built some apartments, it assumes we'll just sort of work out which parts are which are and maybe that's a bad example because churches are tax exempt anyway. 501c3 and 4 seems like a really broad range of possible people adding housing, and so do we have the cleverness in here to deal with partialness when that's true? And then related to that, I was thinking of, okay, here's a group, they might want to have rules on their residents that you have to go to a certain church, or you have to do, be left-handed or whatever. And there's nothing in here that says to get this, they have to not, discriminate against left-handed people. Yeah. So I don't know if that might be covered somewhere else. I don't know. But because 501c3 and c4 is pretty broad, I thought that might need to be covered. So. Which is a question since we're not in deliberation. So.
Yeah. A lot of good questions. That's
Pick a couple off here.
yeah. What I'm wondering is if from Mark's questions and some of the questions we've had, it seems like we might need a little bit more clarification on some of these, or tiebacks to that's referring to this kind of thing. So I'm just wondering if we should bring it back, other than you trying to rewrite different lines in the meeting this evening.
Sure. Yeah, and some of them I think are addressable within the context, but this is not we don't have anyone waiting for this. So it's something we want to deliver, but nothing that has a sense of urgency that must be delivered tonight. So
okay. I just think we have enough possible rewrites on some of this. And then, the people that brought up specific subjects, we can get this in our packet, and then we can have time to talk to you about making sure that, okay, this addressed whatever, before we get to the next meeting where we will all discuss it again. But I think maybe a little bit more clarification would be better, and then having you rewrite it on the fly.
I think part of my comment about 51% was trying to address some of the things Mark brought up.
Yep.
So if different agencies have different criteria, those criteria are they could be applied differently across a series of different candidates. So then it really is kind of a case by case thing. But I think some clarification in the language, kind of indicating that or detailing that more, probably.
Anyone else have any additional comments before we move on from this one?
Can I
Yeah, go ahead, and then Eric.
I will just say that I feel the horror of losing your computer right before this. I've experienced that before recently.
it's good old
My sympathy goes to you.
analog backup right here. Never fails.
Eric?
So I'll just say, just to copy this bill and give some congratulations to Bang's a little effort getting this here. Only constructive comment, perhaps in 30.40.070. There's this talk about a show cause process, compliance, but it doesn't say what court. I assume it's the River City Municipal Court, but out of the powwow of the problem. Reading of that professional capacity, just having it spelled out in the court before too, maybe. And I don't think it's tax court. I don't think it's a certain. I think it's doesn't say.
And my assessment was you are the authority here. So it's not a court, it's the governing body. It's you all. So, but it's worth clarifying that.
Yeah, maybe it should say governing body then instead. Megan, do you have anything else?
Sorry, did you just ask me?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you have anything else. for-
No, that was my two questions.
Say that again, Megan.
Oh,
No?
I already asked my two questions.
All right, so I'm gonna finish that, we are in a public hearing, so I'm gonna finish that. So, the rules for presenting testimony in tonight's hearing, only present testimony after being recognized as a speaker, begin with your name and mailing address, limit testimony to issues relevant to the proposal. If needed, we would set time limits. Also, you can feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. All right, is there anyone that would like to give public testimony this evening? Anyone on Zoom? All right. So we will not close the public hearing. And we will not deliberate because we are asking staff to bring us some additional information and clarifying of some of these issues on this. And so we'll just continue it to, do we need a date certain on this? Dustin or Dan, or do,
I believe Dan would agree that we should continue to a date certain.
okay, all right. Well-
Next meeting,
Can we do it to the next meeting, or do we need to do it to the one after
we should be able to accommodate next meeting
next meeting? Okay,
with no sooner than 6 p.m. 6 p.m.
okay. So we'll continue it to a date certain, which will be the 26th of September, no earlier than 6 p.m.
And if need be, we can continue from that time as well. If we are not ready to open it and immediately continue.
Do I need a motion to continue, Dan, or not?
It probably wouldn't hurt, but understand this is not a land use matter, so you're
Right,
not subject to all those strict procedural requirements for opening, closing, continuing. But just for anyone who's tuning in or might see the recording, just so they know, sure.
okay, can I get a motion to continue to September 26th, no earlier than 6 p.m.?
Madam Mayor, also move.
Thank you, Art.
I'll second.
And Megan has seconded that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Any nays? Any abstentions? Chair votes aye. All right. And the other ordinance. So now we're going to, it's the same. Call to order a public hearing for ordinance 2070. An amendment to chapter. Same chapter,
5.10.
5.10 of the Hood River Municipal Code. Oh, here it is, relating to short-term operating licenses for short-term rentals. We have the same hearing format and rules. So staff report first.
Thank you, Mayor. This ordinance 2070 also comes out of the affordable housing strategy. Like the first one, this was an effort started in 2021, continued in 22, where the city identified opportunities to produce, preserve, and enhance its affordable housing portfolio. And much like the other ordinance, we're not looking at a land use matter. This is a change to an amendment contemplated for licensing of short-term rentals. Within your current ordinance, you have regulations regarding residency and qualifications in your residential zones. Those do not extend in the same way to your commercial zones, C1 and C2. One of the identified scenarios that we saw coming up even during the process was exposure to existing apartment buildings, now often located in the commercial zones. Some of them, your existing multifamily is now in that area, and the exposure for those facilities to be converted essentially to exclusively short-term rentals without a residency requirement. This provision here is created in order to limit that exposure and stop essentially existing multifamily dwellings to be converted to essentially check-in hotels with no, thereby kind of undermining some of your housing goals to provide affordable housing options, long-term housing options in this area. The ordinance is drafted is not has no amortization period and no look back. It is it's term prospective only. So those people that have licenses today will not be impacted by this ordinance. It is only based on future licenses. So the issue has been identified as really an exposure issue and probably something that we're really more concerned about continuing to happen. It's not such an issue that we have seen or recommend as staff going back and having an amortization or kind of runway period where people have existing licenses would lose them. This is only applicable to future licenses. So no impact on validly issued licenses today. So the ordinance you have is listed. There's really one section, and this is on page 29, that is inserted in the current ordinance. So we attempted to be as surgical as possible with this. It is listed under section 2. That's really the change to the existing ordinance in its entirety, as shown there. So the other piece that is defined is what does owner mean. We went in and talked about ownership. That is also on page 29, how the ordinance of 510, chapter 510 is changed by this amendment and by this ordinance. So we have that presented to you. Again, this came out of affordable housing strategy. Much of the input from the stakeholders, from the 6 task force meetings, really impacted and involved this creation, and this was adopted by council. This ordinance is actually just implementation of the strategy itself. So here for questions. We did manage to get an electronic packet up, so we're in better hands than we were before. So.
All right, so have the staff report. So any questions? And then we'll do public testimony if we have any. And then we'll do the deliberations. Any questions for that?
I recommend that it doesn't affect the current folks that have more than one, but do you have any idea of how many owners now have more than one property that's used for STR?
We looked, there's really 3 noteworthy applications here on Sherman Street, Oak Street, and Cascade Avenue. So I would say less than 20 total licenses impacted. So, and really isolated into individual buildings right now. Most of those are townhouse related. There are a couple that are, apartment buildings, but they are multiple licenses to one person across the number of properties. So it was something that we identify. We have a list of every license that we have now. So it's more of a point of exposure, not as necessarily as something that we've seen overrun at this point. However, you are bringing on your first multifamily developments within the last couple decades. And so that's something in terms of preservation. Those are opportunities that have been invested in for the purposes of long-term housing. Again, we're not looking to see this undermined by having it backdoored into a hotel.
And so really this only affects the C zone. This is not R zone because you can't do STRs in. So this is only C zone property.
It does affect our zone, but our zone has a more, it's really not impactful to anyone because within the residential, it has to be your primary residence.
Right,
So,
it's a hosted home share. I call that versus the short-term rental.
right, so
Okay.
those, it's hard to have more than one primary residence. So, so that really actually addresses that, that issue already. So it shouldn't have any impact on the residential pieces. Although it applies to them, it shouldn't have any impact on them.
Other questions?
respect to the hosted home share part of it, I'm assuming that it doesn't apply to people that rent multiple rooms in their house.
It shouldn't, because they're not multiple dwellings. So the point would be, you have a single family dwelling, a hosted home share is renting out a portion of your single dwelling.
So a dwelling unit is not.
Right, so you wouldn't have 4 licenses for 4 bedrooms of your house, you would have 1 license for the address, it's your primary residence.
Mark or Megan?
I did have my hands up, but Tim asked the question, so thanks.
I don't have any questions.
Justin, sorry to interrupt. Did you mention the
Yeah.
slight change in language that you and the city attorney works through?
Yeah, there is one piece within section 4 regarding owners or operating license. I was becoming really picky with some of the language. I wanted to ensure, and we recommend a change, that it's not the owners or operating license. You don't have a class of ownership today that all of a sudden is forever immune to this. The intent is existing licenses are immune and the owners of those licenses. So as written, thinking about future arguments I may have, it's not all of a sudden, because you have a license today, you're forever exempt from this ordinance and any future license. So there's a slight modification that Dan had penned to section 4 to really clarify that it's existing licenses as of today are those that are preserved. It's not because you lived in Hood River and you had an operating license before 2022 that all of a sudden you can do whatever you want for until the end of time. So that it's just a matter of it's some semantics, but they're important when it comes down to.
So that's where you took out the or
Yeah,
on
and
this. Okay.
Dan actually had some advanced modifications that really, I think, galvanized it in greater detail.
So did you want to change it from what we have here on page 29 right now?
And Dan, I think you can jump in and.
Sure. So the last sentence in section 4 should read, this 2022 amendment to Hood River Municipal Code, chapter 5.10 shall have prospective effect only and shall not extinguish operating licenses existing on the date of its enactment.
Okay, can you read that
Can you
again?
repeat that?
Shall not extinguish what?
Shall have prospective effect only and shall not extinguish operating licenses existing on the date of its enactment.
Okay. Right. Great. Additional questions? All right. Do we have anyone that wants to give public testimony this evening? Jen, anyone on Zoom? Okay. Just want to ask, do we have any conflict of interest? No? No? Okay. Mark or Megan?
No.
Okay.
None.
None, okay. I have 4 rentals. They're all in the R zone. They're all long-term. So I don't think it affects anything to do with this whatsoever, but I just want to state that for transparency. Deliberations. I think we got most of our questions answered. How are people feeling?
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
And I think I can say this because I really wasn't involved, so it's not self-congratulatory, but what I saw through this process going back a year or so was the council having idea of getting a panel together, getting advice, having staff spend time to think of good ideas, having this be one of the ideas proposed. Here we are voting on it. So it just, I think, and I get the least amount of credit because I didn't have as many touches as others like Councilor Saunders, but I guess I just compliment council and staff for getting this here. I think the short-term rental issue is a complicated one. It was a little bit before my time, but a lot of hard decisions were made and people continue to debate the policy choices that were made, but they've been made. And this seems like it's very targeted at solving a problem that should be solved. So I congratulate those who were involved and am pleased to vote yes for this.
All right, thank you.
I think it looks great.
Tim? All right, Mark? Thumbs up by Mark. Megan?
Yeah, I'm excited to vote for this. I think it's a logical loophole to close.
All right. I'm also in agreement. I think it's, just a potential problem that we could see coming down the pipeline. We're trying to proactively take care of it to keep more long-term rentals available. So great work. Thanks, Megan, for being on the committee and bringing us the ideas.
A really big shout out to staff for actually getting this in front of us. That's the hard part.
All right.
Mayor, may I
Go
just
ahead.
mention that city recorder sent you a letter of support from a resident today on this issue. Make sure that you had all seen that.
Okay, great.
That
Thanks
was-
for
I think
mentioning
the
that so
author
that we
was
have that
Kate
in the record.
Mhm.
Great. All right, I'll go ahead and now close the public hearing and we have deliberated. We have deliberated. And there was no one to give other testimony this evening. So I'm looking for a motion to place ordinance 2070 on tonight's agenda for its first reading.
So moved.
Do we need to call out the edit or no?
Yes, I'd
Um,
modify the motion to, but that would actually happen in the regular business part of the agenda, because that's where the motion to adopt would occur. And that would be a roll call vote also.
Got
So
it.
just
Thank
don't
you.
forget that when it comes time.
Okay, well then I will second Tim's motion.
All right, Tim's made the motion and Megan has seconded the motion to place ordinance 2070 on tonight's agenda for first time reading with the amendment that we talked about. And it'll be roll call when we do that. All those in favor of putting it on the tonight's agenda for reading?
Aye.
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 Abstentions? Nays? Chair votes aye. All right. And that's it for public hearings. We don't have anything on the work session. Do we have, open work session? Do we have any additions or corrections?
We do not.
Nothing.
Ma'am.
Okay. So we will adjourn that because we have nothing to do under that. We'll open the regular council meeting. And so agenda additions or corrections.
Yes, I think based on the conversation you had as the Urban Renewal Board, we've added a regular business item. So there'll be regular business item number 3, approval of the scope of work for the RFP for consultant services for a West Side district.
All right.
Thank you.
And I think the only other thing is that under city recorder, the reading of ordinance 1969, we won't have that this evening because we're going to do some more adjustments on that. So we won't have that one. So the consent agenda, we have several different things on that this evening. And does anyone have any questions? We have Mark Janik here this evening. Thank you for coming and doing all this work on the wastewater treatment plant for us. We really appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions on that?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Second.
I have a motion from Jessica and a second from Tim to approve the consent agenda. Anyone have any problems or need anything pulled off? No. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Nays? Abstentions? Chair votes aye. All right, regular business items. Authorization of construction funds for the signalization of Cascade and Rand intersection. A topic we've heard before.
I was gonna say, have we heard this one yet?
Well,
Thanks,
I
Wade.
think you're all pretty familiar with it, so I don't really have a presentation. I just kind of wanted to open it up to questions. You know, this IGA started 5 years ago, and it's been 2.5 years since council authorized design and right-of-way funds, and we are approaching a deadline, put it out for bid, but the ODOT process doesn't allow it to bid without the funds being committed ahead of time. But we kind of like to see how much it costs and then commit the funds, so a little bit different, but yeah, mainly I just wanted to be available for questions because it's been around for a while and it's been before you a few times. Anybody?
Mark?
So is the 2.6, is that where we were last time? Or,
Yeah,
okay,
last 6 months ago, and now we've dropped all the way down to 3.5.
okay, that was my only question, Kate.
So we're 900,000 more than we were. Is that what you're saying?
Then the original,
In the original?
it was 2.3 and it's 3.5, so 1.2.
Okay.
Can I, the 129,000 that's still left in the ODOT pot?
Yeah,
Is we will be able to apply that once we pretend it's not there and we allocate the full amount, or no?
yes.
Okay. Make a big difference in that budget.
Well, it makes a difference anyway.
I mean, I'll still take the money, so thank you.
This is probably a ridiculous question, but I'm still going to ask it. Because of just so much frustration with the length of time it takes to do all these things. If 5 years ago, when the cost was considerably less and construction was considerably less, yes, it's an ODOT road, but if we had been able to go out for bids and get it done and just say, yeah, throw your $750,000 in ODOT, we're paying for it, we're getting it done this year. Could we have done that or no?
I think we could have done it. I want to think we could have done it faster, which would equate to being less expensive too. But, you know, we still had to go through all the ODOT approvals on the road, so I'm not sure how much faster it could have gone. The right-of-way phase is what added about 2 years to the project, and it's still not quite complete.
Getting the right of ways,
Yeah.
those things.
So we had plans that were very far along, but didn't have anyone proceeding with procuring right of way. So.
And they did all that. Okay, just crazy idea.
So the increased costs is related to kind of what's happening with inflation.
At this point, what you see is an increase in construction from about 1.5, if I remember right, 5 years ago to 2.6 now. And that's purely, inflation driven.
Optimism, unemployment, optimism. That somehow prices could rectify this. There's potential for the costs to come down.
Yes. Oh,
Definitely optimism.
it's all the bid
Thanks.
environment, and it is a good time of year to bid, so. Because it'll be for next spring's construction. The construction is spread over basically a full year plus, because of the phasing to not impede traffic on Cascade during the summer months. So the work you can work here up until Memorial Day, then you can work here. After Labor Day, you can come back over here. So it does stretch it out. How that affects the costs, hard to say.
How long did you say you thought that might take?
I think it'll take probably a little over a year.
Total.
Yeah. We'll start next spring and it'll probably wrap up by Memorial Day of 24.
And that will happen prior to Second and Oak happening.
I don't have an up-to-date schedule on Second and Oak. It could happen at the same time. Again, it's another one of those shoulder season projects that we don't want to do in the summer.
Additional questions for Wade?
I have a question. So, with respect to this, 1 million or so more, I see in the memo there's reference to this is being funded through the road fund. But I guess what we are, of course, missing our financial whiz person.
Yes.
In the hall or in the office of one of the Will's office. And I guess I'll just ask the question: do we have any? From a policy perspective, you want to say yes, we need the signal, so let's pay for it. But
right.
I guess my question is, what sort of financial diligence have we done, or should we do, if it hasn't been done, to just make sure that this doesn't put us in the reds?
We have looked at it. It does pretty much deplete that fund. We have a couple things we can do. The first, I think you're gonna have to see what the impacts are with the federal funding, but we also have Main Street elevated sidewalk scheduled to start this year. I don't know that they're gonna be ready because that's how fast that moves. I think we pushed that a year. It's about 400,000 we were planning to spend this year, but we would not. I think that's probably the first thing we look at. You know, there's also interfund loans or other loans. It pretty much wipes out the fund. And Second Oak is funded separately. It's all coming out of urban renewal, so it doesn't affect the Second Oak signal.
Oh, because that's urban renewal district.
And what is the city's sunk cost typically on this project? I mean, I've seen some numbers here. I don't think we've spent, 2.6 or we've certainly not 3.5. But what are the actual plans?
We have. So the total cost of 3.5 with 2.6 remaining. So we didn't spend all of that. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I believe our total is somewhere around 800 cities, 750 ODOT.
Already spent.
Some, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, there's a motion on page 81.
Move that we authorize the expenditure of $2,612,164 for the construction of the Cascade and Rand signalization project.
A second.
I have a motion by Jessica and a second by Megan that we authorize the expenditure of $2,612,164 for the construction of the Cascade and Rand signalization project. Any additional discussion?
Mayor,
Go ahead.
this is I remember this is like the third time we've come to this type of vote. We begrudgingly vote yes, and I guess I'm going to begrudgingly vote yes again. But I guess I'm just wanted to say out loud what at least I'm thinking, which is we're making a value judgment about prioritization, prioritizing Cascade potentially over some other things. I think that's okay, but we're just going to do that. But with $800,000 in some costs, I mean, I was literally considering no, but we've already spent 800,000. I wouldn't want that to be wasted. So I'm a yes, but it's a hard yes, or it's a difficult yes.
Mayor, can I interrupt? I'm
Yeah,
so
go
sorry.
ahead, Abigail.
I have more updated numbers than what
Okay.
Wade had said. I have from my spreadsheet, and Monica just confirmed with me that the city spent about $514,000 in city design costs. And then right of way, our contribution was $807,000. So it's closer to 1.3 million in some costs so far. And then the additional cost for construction. Yeah, 800 was for the right of way, but then there was $500,000 in design as well.
Well, we can't.
Thanks for the clarification on the numbers. Thanks. If there's no more discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any nays? Undecided? Abstentions? Chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. So many papers that, all right, the fire station cell tower lease.
Mayor, I do not have a presentation for you. Want to acknowledge that this was a big body of work getting this to the finish line. Want to thank Will Norris, our former finance director, Adam Schmidt, who has been working with the actual technical pieces. They actually did I'm going to say a flyby. That's not the right term. A visual inspection of the cell tower, and he was part of the team that helped the contractor with that. And then, of course, Dan Kearns, who gave a careful review of this. So you have the information here, and I'm going to rely on Dan to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Abigail.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions on this? Mark?
Yeah, thanks. In paragraph 6B, which is on page 87, it talks about what things the city can hook to the tower, and it's limited to public works stuff. And I know, Adam, you were already talking about possibly using that site to do the water meter antennas. And frankly, for something this long, I think that we should have almost a carte blanche on being able to hang stuff on the tower. Because who knows, our fusion power antennas will need to go somewhere, and that would be a good place for it in 50 years too. So I suggest that paragraph be updated as part of this process to give us the ability to put anything we want on that tower.
Thanks, Counselor, for that comment. I will note, I think this was the stickiest of the sticking points with this contract. I think it was previously limited to just public safety. And so expanding it to include the AMI radio piece was important. And I assume from this that we can replace that as needed. But I don't know about adding additional pieces. Dan, do you have any information on that?
Can I clarify? I feel like Mark's talking about the 2008 agreement and not.
I have to admit, I did not read verbatim all 70 pages of this, so maybe it's in a different page.
Page 87 of the packet was the 2008 lease, not the new one.
And what page is the new one where it says we can hang anything on it?
Well, that's asking too much, Mark.
Or Dan, maybe. Yeah.
I'm looking, but I remember that coming up. So you're right. This is an amendment to that lease. So let me plow through this because it did come up, I thought.
And the staff report talks about making us able to put more stuff on it. So I didn't look for the specific language.
And I thought it was more just for the to read the meter things, but I don't know if it says specifically that. And then I also thought I read on there that they didn't think they were going to be able to hang too many more cells on it,
right?
Because of the size of it. So if they can't put those on there, how are we going to have more room to put stuff on there? I guess I'm just kind of wondering if it's kind of maxed out. But they can't extend the height or the size. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't find a reference to height, but that was one of my questions as well, which is, can they not put a 300-foot tower there next to where the helicopter lands? So.
If I could add something, this is Adam. The AMI antenna is currently on the tower. And then I just received an email from the folks at American Tower, and they're working with T-Mobile right now to extend the tower, I believe 25 feet. There's some language there that allows them to extend the tower 25 feet. So it's, I know it's in the works. There's a painted out area where their building is, the existing building is there now that they have, and they're planning on putting, I believe it's like a 10. Well, they're not. They're proposing to put it's maybe like a 10 by 12 building within their leased area that they have, and that is through T-Mobile. So, and what I read as far as the city, and this was going back to talking to Will about this, he had said that the city had kind of like a one-time freebie. And so when we put the AMI antenna up there, we paid a $750 like processing fee basically to put the antenna up there. So I read through the current contract that we have, and I never really saw anything that limited the city to what we could put up there.
The paragraph I referenced limits what the city can put up there, but that, like Megan said, that's the old one, but I haven't found a new one. And they can go 25 feet taller, Adam?
So what I read, and this was, I didn't really go through it too deeply just because they were more so asking a question. I think Dustin was included in this email as well, but they had come out and asked a question if we would want to have our current antenna that we have is mounted at 60 feet, and they were offering for us to move our antenna up all the way to the top of the current tower if T-Mobile was to come along. So, but yeah, within that email that I got, there was referencing to the current contract, kind of a loophole to allow them to extend the height of the tower.
I mean, Life Flight is right there, right? Can it go up 25 feet and not screw those guys up?
I can't comment on that, but Life Flight doesn't land there anymore either. So
Life Flight is not landing there anymore?
correct. Okay. They're landing at the airport now.
Okay.
Are they going to take out? I mean, there's still a big thing that says helicopters here, right?
There's a painting on the pad that says Life Flight.
Kate, can I say an opinion, I guess?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that until we get exactly what we want, we say no. This is all their benefit and very little city benefit from my read, and they want 50 more years. I think that that's sort of nutty, unless we get everything that we want. And if they say no, then what are the, fine. We get $1,500 a month or a little bit, something like that now, which is almost nothing, right? So my opinion is that for something this long, we need some real hooks in it to the city's benefit, not to Verizon's benefit.
I will say also, when I met with the gentleman that flew the tower, there's roughly 6, I believe, antennas on there, and those are all city-owned antennas. Some of them are the dispatch antennas for fire and police personnel, along with like our public works radios or go off there as well. So it's not just the one AMI antenna. There's 5 other antennas as well that are city-owned, county-owned antennas. So
my read, Adam, is they could tell you to take the AMI and the public works antenna off. But the fact that they're not, and none of my grumpiness is aimed at you or anyone, any city person that's trying to make a deal. I'm fully grumpy at this company that's trying to take advantage of us. So.
Yeah, I've looked at these types of leases previously in my previous job. This is almost identical, a different company. And And then a different company took that one over, and they usually won't even talk to you unless it's 25 or 30 years because they just have too much infrastructure than people they have to send out to do these, do these kinds of things. So this is pretty familiar type of a lease that I've looked at in the past. They won't look at short-term things at all because it's just too much investment by them. So I'm not against it, I guess. I'm not against doing this. If there's something specific, the tower's up there and we don't want it any taller, or we do want it taller because we need it to read our meters. If we're going to go taller, then can they go taller? I mean, the tower's going to be up there. I guess my question for Adam is, do you think we're going to need it to go taller to read the meters for the city when we get fully up and going on the pilot project we've been doing?
So the cost savings is really minimal. So that antenna that's up there is a collector. And so then we would have these other antennas around town that would collect information, send it to the main collector. So the cost savings, you're talking maybe $30,000 cost savings if we didn't go higher versus going higher. So yeah, there would be a benefit in going higher. It would read more meters, but in the end, is it worth the cost savings? Their collectors are roughly 15 grand. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of how you'd have to look at that.
Also, an increase in the tower height, I believe, requires a conditional use permit or a variance at least. It requires a land use process. And so far, the city's needs, as they've been identified to me, would not require the height increase. Usually that's driven by cell providers. The other thing this provides, it starts out at over $1,600 a month with a 3% annual automatic escalator and a $10,000 signing bonus. And we also get 10% of future rents, and that would be from the cell providers that are on this tower. So it isn't, I wouldn't call it nothing. It has a lot more than most cell tower leases I've seen for local governments.
So can we get clarity on Mark's thing? Is there actual language in the new amendment that allows us to do more than public safety equipment? Or does that need to be added?
I thought it was in here. I'm not finding it. So public safety and public works, I believe, are currently covered. Wasn't no other needs were brought to my attention. I mean, generally local governments don't have anything but public works and public safety requirements.
But it's till 2068. I mean, so we're looking out for our great grandkids' needs.
Right, but what would we need? I mean, how would we modify this to include what you anticipate the city would need for future antennas that it would want to attach to this?
I'd say whatever the city says needs to be attached gets attached.
The question would be whether we'd want to attach other private contractors and those sorts of things.
So the staff report said that the agreement was brought in the city's rights to co-locate its own communication equipment on the tower. And I think, I liked seeing that in the staff report. I'll admit I didn't read the 70 pages either.
I can't find it either in the amendment, but that was part of the discussion I had with Will as he was communicating with American Tower.
Anyone else have any other comments on this contract? So Mark, you'd like us to get some more broader language about what the city can attach. We would have to go through a conditional use permit to make it taller. and we don't necessarily need it taller for the city. One more question that I've got, and maybe Dan or maybe Dustin can answer this, I'm not sure. Maybe it's the 5G or something else that can be attached to like utility poles throughout the city instead of having a tower. We have that, correct? I mean,
Right.
that's,
It's small cell, and that's forced by federal law that local governments allow that to happen, co-location on utility poles throughout the city. Those are smaller, lower power antenna arrays.
so if we, for some reason, didn't allow this, we might have more of those going in around the city, potentially. Is that,
I suppose
is
so.
that
I don't
an
know
assumption
that.
or not correct?
The usual assumption is you get one that's a lot taller or a bunch that are smaller. That's just a general translation. In this particular case, I don't think so necessarily. If this became impossible for American Tower and to provide this for its customers, then the customers would site their own cell towers elsewhere in the city. And whether that would be small cell, I don't know for sure. I kind of doubt it, since the small cell doesn't really replace the standard cell antenna arrays, but I'm not sure.
All right, I don't see any more comments, so I'm going to try and see if we can wrap it up. Does anyone want to have different language such as Mark suggested? I guess with more flexibility of what the city can put on the tower? Or are you
So-
okay with it being the way it is?
I guess
Megan?
I more want clarity of, I want the language that was in the staff report, and I just want to know if it's actually in the legal agreement or not.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I mean, it may not actually need to have language added to it if it's there. We just don't seem to be able to find it. But it's kind of implied that it's there. So if it is there, then perhaps it doesn't need to be amended.
Okay, so is this something we need to have be brought back so we can research it a little bit better? So we've had a couple of questions, I think, that came up this evening about clarification of whether things are in or not in. And so maybe we can just get those things clarified and bring that back to council at the next meeting. And
We
then
can do
we
that.
finish discussing it then.
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Is everyone okay with that?
Put that on the September 26th agenda.
Okay. Okay, great.
And Mayor, on that,
Go ahead.
I didn't chime in, and that was intentional. On this one, I think in an abundance of caution, I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion and the vote.
Oh, okay, just for conflict, potentially,
Potential
who knows? Okay, all right. Thanks, Eric. All right. So we'll move that forward to the next meeting with more clarification next time. All right, so the third thing on our regular business items is a motion to approve the scope of work for the RFP that Urban Renewal forwarded to us for the West Side Urban Renewal District consultant. So does someone want to make a motion to approve that scope of work?
Can I add the bit about speeding it up if at all possible?
Yes.
I will make a motion that we approve the RFP for the West Side Urban Renewal District feasibility study and TIF with the formal request to amend the timeline of the feasibility studies so that we can have a completed by August 23.
Great, we have a motion by Mark as amended
I'll second that.
and seconded, Jessica seconded that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Any nays? Abstentions? Chair votes aye. All right. Great. City recorder, reading of ordinance 1970. And did you catch that language, Jen, that Dan changed, or do you want us to read it?
I was just going to include it in the motion, just saying, and to include the amendments as discussed.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'd like to entertain a motion for the first reading of ordinance 2070 by title only, and to include the amendment as discussed this evening.
So moved.
Is it ordinance not 2070 or 19?
1970. And Tim's made a motion
I'll second.
and Jessica seconded that.
Counselor Meta,
Aye.
Counselor Saunders, Counselor Saunders,
Megan?
she's there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Sorry, the Wi-Fi's sketchy. Yes.
Counselor Cunahan,
Aye.
Counselor Zanmiller,
Yes.
Counselor Haney.
Aye.
Your Honor.
Yes.
Ordinance 2070, an ordinance amending Title 5, Business Taxes, Licenses, Regulations, Chapter 5.10, Short-Term Rental Operating License, Section 5.10.030, Definitions, and 5.10.080, Criteria for approval of an operating license and operating license renewal of the Hood River Municipal Code to limit owners to a single license at a time and a separate license per dwelling unit.
All right. Thank you, Jen. Mayor call. And by-state working group has been meeting. We were maybe a short amount of people, a small amount of group of people will be going back to Washington DC again in November to talk to the Federal Transportation Department. And we have hired the we have a contract with a group that's going to basically be doing the work for the by-state working group now. Continuing to work with making the compact, the two-state compact come to reality the first part of next year and probably be up and working by the middle of next year. And so lots of things are happening. There's been a report come out on the bridge recently. I think they're doing it every year now on the condition of the current bridge. So 3 years ago, I believe we were at 36%. So it's 0 to 100. 100 is a brand new bridge. 0 is basically one that's ready to fall. We were at 38 of around 3 years ago. Last year we were at 16, and I believe we are at 6. It's not good news at all. So ODOT's looking at that right now, and we'll be recommending whether need more weight reduction, what's going to have to happen, whether the maintenance schedule is going to have to be accelerated, so more money will have to be spent on that. But it's not good news, and we should have some information from ODOT hopefully within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I'll bring that forward. We did have a delegation of federal electeds, their staffers out, and we took them onto both sides of the river and over the bridge and talked about the importance of it to both communities on both sides and gave them a lot of information. We're doing the same thing with state representatives from both sides later this month. So we're really pushing the information on what this sufficiency rating is out. So I've been, helping with that. had another, well, I guess I may have had 2 meetings on the Houseless Collaborative, the statewide Houseless Collaborative. And there'll be another meeting in October. So we're coming up with some ideas, coordinating with Abigail, coordinating with Kenny at McCack and the Dalles. So lots of meetings happening recently. And then there was a kind of a, I guess I call it a fun thing that happened today, kind of a last minute thing that I was invited to. There was a group of delegates from Indonesia that came, and they're working on sustainable tourism in some portion, I believe some island of Indonesia. And they were hearing about sustainable tourism with Emily Reed, who works with the tourism board. And so I greeted them and welcomed them today. And so it was a great information gathering. We had to have a translator, so there wasn't as much communication as I was hoping we might be able to have, and didn't have a super long period of time, but I thought it was a beneficial thing for everybody. That's all I've got. Eric? Jessica?
Nothing from me.
Tim?
Last Thursday, we had a meeting of the Energy Council. First meeting in a while. There was a lot of interest in the Energy Council coming and presenting and interacting with the City Council. Apparently, the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of provisions in there that could potentially be used to further some of our goals. And so there's interest in developing like a work plan, and they would try to identify projects before the meeting and then coordinate with us to try to figure out which one of those would be best to move forward. So I thought that was a pretty exciting opportunity. Apparently there's a lot of funding available to do some of the stuff that we've been talking about and the Energy Council has been promoting. So I think it's a good opportunity, and hopefully Alexia and Lindsay will reach out to you, Abigail, and Kate to try to set up that meeting. But it would be great if we could do that and get together with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
That's a good reminder about they're doing a Solarize Hood River County
Yes.
campaign right now, which I think we're probably helping share the info.
Right, we've been sharing the information on our social media accounts.
Yeah. And if you don't have solar on your house and you're interested in it, it's a good idea to sign up.
All right. Mark?
Nothing right now. Thanks.
Megan?
Nothing.
Okay. All right. So go ahead, Abigail.
I asked Fire Chief Leonard Damian to give a quick update if we've got one more minute. I
Yes,
think
we
he's
do.
on
Yes,
Zoom.
we do.
Thank
Yes.
you.
This is the fire season.
Chief, there he is.
Hello. So I'll make this quick and brief because I know it's been a long evening. I just get a quick update on the fire department and some information. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But it's been a busy summer so far this summer. Our incidents compared to last year were up just over 15%. But a lot of that is due to interfacility transfers with the hospital, which is up 66%. So that's the big driver of our increased workload. We have been in wildland season. If you are aware or remember, we applied for a staffing grant to this Oregon State Fire Marshal's office. So we were awarded that. So I've been using those funds to up staff, at least in July during the days that were over 100 degrees and red flag days that were in July and August. And now that we're in September, which has been historically our busy time of the year for wildland fires, we're going to be staffing 12-hour shifts additional through most of that month to fully utilize the grant. So that's been going on for that. And as you're aware, PSPS or public safety power shutoffs have been occurring in our neighboring county, at Clackamas County. Our new emergency manager, Charles Young, has been involved in that, and we'll have probably some more to share, and I hope to bring him out to talk about that. But I know that our EOC staff will be covering lessons learned from those fires in Clackamas County. But this is just a reminder for everyone that's listening to make sure you sign up for Everbridge through Hood River County Sheriff's Office. That is the primary way for the sheriff to notify citizens of any evacuation. So let's just hope that is not going to happen this summer, and hope that rain that happened this morning continues to reduce that risk. And then the last thing is we still have one vacancy, and Friday are interviews to fill that. So that is my quick report for everybody. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to answering those in the future one-on-one.
Chief, is there a meeting coming up on the Wildland Urban Interface here in Hood River? I thought I saw something about that.
That actually was occurring during this meeting. So the next one should be, I believe, tomorrow in the Dalles.
Tomorrow in the Dalles.
And-
Okay.
Yep, and so they have communicated that to all the people that own tax lots that are in that vicinity, and I want to say nearby it as well, for educational purposes for mitigation measures.
Okay. Do you know if those meetings are being recorded so that people could listen to those later?
I do not. I can look and see what is going on for tomorrow. I know it's in person this evening, or it should be over by now. That was at the Best Western. The one in the Dalles, I don't recall exactly the location, but I can make sure that's probably put up on the city's website or share that on the Facebook page.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for the chief? Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate the
Have a good
update.
night. Yep.
All right, we have an executive session this evening. So the city council will now meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192.6602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions, and ORS 192.6602H to consult with counsel regarding the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff are allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room, and we will end the public broadcast. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made nor final action taken in executive session. The executive session is anticipated to last 15 minutes,
15 and 20 minutes
15 or 20 minutes.
and no decision.
At the end of the executive session, the city council meeting will be adjourned and no action will be taken. We will now discontinue the live feed and recording.